Hey, I'm
Hey,
having
Margaret.
a lot of
Welcome.
weird problems today. I tried to come in on Chrome, and Blue Jeans just said Chrome has stopped supporting plugins. And I'm like,
Oh,
since
wow.
when? So then I, followed all the steps, and they're like, we're just going to send you to Safari anyway. And I'm like, okay, Safari on my computer is super slow, and can you hear me okay? Like, do I sound weird at all? It's okay.
Yep.
Because it's my experience that Safari has just been wildly slow. So,
All right, I'm
yeah.
reporting that right now to the folks at here.
I think it might just be something to do with like my version of Chrome, but I don't know. And so there's actually apparently some download to fix the plugin issue, but then when I try and run the actual like DMG file to update Chrome, it just quits automatically. Everything just shuts down, and I've done it several times. I'm going to try it one more time, see if I can.
You've been using Chrome before, right? And I do
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, the entire class have been using Chrome, and today it's just decided Chrome updated and has stopped supporting plugins.
All right, so I feel like I've been warned about Chrome, and she warned Sam Keen about coming in on Chrome, but I'd never noticed it because I use it every day, and I've been teaching this class, every day.
Right.
So, all right, I'm writing. I'll ask. Should I be telling people to switch over? So it said something like Chrome is not support. What was the verbiage?
Let's see here. Let's see here. It says almost there. Looks like your Chrome updated and has stopped supporting plugins. And then it says, don't worry, we're going to take you to your meeting in Safari. And then there's two options after that. And actually, if you click the that's okay method, and then it'll send you a protocol request, and then it'll give you the option to get the latest plugin. I've tried that, and every time I download the package to get the plugin, it shuts down.
Okay.
But if this works in Safari, then
Yeah.
it just takes a really long time for Safari to even get everything to load, so.
Yeah.
Oh, it looks like there's actually two versions. Do you see two versions of me in the room right now?
No, just you.
Well, that's really weird.
Margaret, give me your opinion of whether I should. I don't have anything to project today because we're just talking, so maybe, and this is maybe irrelevant, but I'm wondering if I project. Just a second, it's getting ready to come up. Whether it'd be better to have that and as a background, or whether that's weird, or because you can still see. Wait, well, I need more participants before I do anything else. Like, I don't. Are you seeing the Sam Keen book showing up there? Or, yeah. I'm wondering if he'd see that, or if all he'd see would be our images.
He'd see it.
Oh, and if I unplug it, does it just show our faces?
Yeah, it's just our faces. In fact, I mean,
So I don't gain much from this.
No,
Right?
probably not. You're actually probably
Let's
losing
just go
other
with,
people's.
Yeah, let's just go with our faces then, and not have any background, because that's. Yeah, I don't think I need to project anything. has your workload settled down a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's been like there hasn't been anything major due this week, which is actually kind of, I don't know. It can be sort of relieving in one sense, but also like I don't feel like I've gotten a whole lot done.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I still feel guilty for not getting anything done, so I don't feel like I've relaxed.
Yeah.
It's like it's a no-win situation.
Do you have summers off usually?
It depends on what you mean by off.
What are summers? What is your plan for the summer?
I think I'm going to go to the University of Rochester and do like a little like 1 week summer program there, and then
Okay.
I go hiking with my family and take a linear algebra and a counting and probability class online.
Okay.
And then I'm supposed to go to like an art school for a couple of weeks in Michigan and live with my cousins. So
Okay.
like
Hi,
school,
Samvit.
but not really.
Yeah. Good. Hi, Samvit.
Margaret has milk plain. What is this?
What?
He has milk. What?
I don't know. I like chocolate milk. That's all.
I'm eating Oreos.
Oh, you're eating Oreos with milk. Okay, you're fancy.
I'm notorious for eating and drinking all the time in class.
Dang. What's your thoughts? So Mr. Keith's supposed to show up today? That'll be cool.
Yeah, he'll be here in a little bit. Hi, guys. Hey, Chad, good to see you. You feeling a little better?
Yes, I am. I thought yesterday was Thursday for some reason.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I'm okay.
That's just because you were a little sick.
Yes, that's probably it.
And you and Joel are trying to mess with me today by both wearing dark blue. Way to go, guys. Nice.
We planned it and we were sitting next to each other, so.
Yeah.
Would you like me to write their names on the board
Yeah,
behind
that'd be
them?
really helpful. No, but we can probably tighten that camera in just a little bit more.
It goes down on its own.
Wait, which one am I supposed to? Which switch is it?
Yeah.
Left switch.
Will it hold more than 4? Or?
It'll hold 9.
Hey, Josh.
You only have
Yeah.
4.
Once I get more, I'll get more. Oh, that's
Yeah.
sweet.
Um,
But that sort of maximizes on the screen.
if you do start,
So if you hit switch layouts again, what's it going to do? Switch.
so it's going to do like
It'll
just
keep
one person.
rotating through the.
Yeah. Then it'll go back to that.
Okay, and maybe we like it better with everybody big. Or,
It's up to you.
okay, let's try it one more then. Yeah. Hey guys, hey Chandler, how's it going?
It's good. How's it going?
Doing well. Samvit, tighten in a little bit with you on the screen, and Maya, welcome to class, Maya. Do you have sound? Oh, you're muted over there, Maya.
Yeah, I have some.
All right, welcome to class. Yeah, come in a little tighter, Maya. There you go. A little more. A little more. A little more. A little more. Come on. Samvit, come in a little tighter. Remember, we've got a guest today.
Apologies, Mr. Walker, but I'm at Mac Zoom.
You're at
Never
what?
mind. Now you see my face. Okay, this is too close.
Now you're looking. There we good. Now we're good.
Now you can see all my buttons. That's not fun. There.
Hey, Morgan. So you guys, it's going to be a little bit of a free-for-all. Once he gets here, we'll introduce him and get to say some, I'll have him have some introductory remarks. You guys can raise your hands for questions. Let me just do a quick check on roll. Chad made it. So we're waiting on Robin, and good to see Chandler. Max has got a I'm going to use air quotes now.
I told my coach to email you.
Max has got a tennis match, and he's dismissed at 2:30.
It's the same match as last time. It got rained out. We went all the way. We drove an hour away.
Hey, Robin.
Got rained out right when we got there.
There's absolutely no way that's true.
Yeah, right, guys. We took a little poll
It's been
at
like
the
the
end of
past
class.
2 weeks.
I got people to email me and give me some feedback on how projects have gone. And part of the question, as a PS, was: is Max really on the tennis team? And is Robin maybe secretly a fashion model? And Robin, it looks like the cameras have stopped shuttering for just a little while for this class, and I think that's great, but I'm sure you'll be back on the runway soon, which is awesome. So I'm always nervous when we don't have things, so we'll see. We did a test drive with Mr. Keene, and that worked, so we'll be good. No issues, no worries. We'll have. So are you guys looking at 6 screens right now?
So it doesn't change their
Anything for
layout.
them? Yeah.
It only changes
Yeah.
you.
I like this.
Okay.
And again, if we change it one more, just whoever was talking would be bigger on the screen, right? And it would still rotate around the background.
So if you change it one more,
Yeah.
whoever is
It'll-
speaking will take
The whole thing.
screen.
Yeah.
And then if you
not do
change
that.
it one more, it goes back to that main speaker
Main
with the
and
4 at the
small.
bottom.
Yeah. And
Fort
then-
Worth Country Day.
Fort Worth Country Day, question coming in from Ms. Obey.
Yes.
Yes.
Do you guys see 6 people on the screen?
Yes.
One of them is big.
Do you want to change? So, do you have your life-size remote?
Yes.
All right, hit the star button, and then you should have a menu, and the first one, number 1, says about change the layout. And you can use that to toggle between 3 different layouts, whatever works best for you. Is it changing?
No.
They broke it.
Yeah, no.
This one.
Yeah, so.
Nothing's coming up. I think the layout's pretty good.
Okay.
I'm
What
just
is
gonna,
y'all's like?
ours is like awesome.
Ours is 6 on one screen. us
6
the
on
other.
one screen.
You can switch to the back camera and show them.
Oh wow.
Oh,
Genius.
which one?
I
is
know
it?
that's over here. This is.
Max. Max is going to show you what we're looking at, and then you have to pan the camera to.
You wanted these? We got.
We're getting ready to show you what you guys look like to us.
You want to zoom out just a little bit now?
Yeah, I can try and do that.
There you
I'm
go.
just going to check my email real quickly and see if I get anything
Got a
from this.
very nice painting of a dog with one eye. That's what we're looking at.
All right, so let's switch back to us. Just
And now you are way over there. There's the dog again.
Oh, wait, Sam. Hello, David. I'm logged into Blue Jeans, but I don't see anyone else in the meeting. Okay.
You must have one. You must have the test one.
I give him the help
This
me
class.
try this classroom with like the number
Yeah. What's your meeting ID?
9844
Yep.
75664. Try this as your, what do you call it? Your
Meeting ID. Or, yeah.
oops. All right, so Mr. Keene is on Blue Jeans, but in a different room at this point, so we will work this out. Since Max has to go to tennis and play a tennis match, I'm wondering if you guys would be okay if Max asked the first question. I mean, is that, do you want to ask a question?
I would love
Yeah.
to ask a question.
All right, good.
I nominate that we all hold our books to like near our face when he shows
Yeah,
up.
be like, Oh, hi, Mr. Keen.
I'm just like, I don't know.
Good call.
I am really looking forward to fight game this class. I'm guessing some of these.
Yeah, you got to mention that. Actually, tell them now.
So, just to kill some time, in our last semester MSON class, in one of the last classes, we took guesses at how tall everybody is because it was just very intrigued. I don't know. Do we want to do that now, or we'll save?
I think we'll do that at some point. It'll be fun.
It. I'm so excited. Do it.
It's kind of a process. Mr. Walker really designed it well. You like write down, you get points and stuff. For your
Yeah,
guesses.
you write down everyone's name and you guess their height, and then we call out we ask people what their actual height is, and then we figure out how close we are within who has the lowest deviation from that.
Yeah, to minimize cheating, because we actually have planned ahead, you should have everybody email you the class before,
Yeah.
the class before our last class.
I think everybody will not cheat. The only people that have a little advantage is Margaret was in a class with you last semester, so
I shouldn't say I completely remember how tall she was.
yeah.
I don't even remember how tall you said you were.
I know. Yeah.
Max?
Yes.
Since since you're taking like the Malone course right next to the teacher, I mean, what is that perspective like?
Good question.
You know, it's interesting because it's kind of funny in that the way that I actually think in some ways Mr. Walker pays less attention to me than especially in our last MSON course we had kid Young Hyun who is infamous for dozing in class a little bit and probably once a week, so like one out of every 2 classes, he would put his head like this so that you couldn't see him in the video monitor and just fall asleep. And Mr. Walker, it would generally take him about 5 to 10 minutes to notice. And we use Adobe Connect much more. And there was a chat, and it was a hot topic of the chat of exactly when he was going to fall asleep and how long it would take for Mr. Walker to fall asleep.
Are we talking about Young Hyun?
Mr. Walker to notice him. Yeah. And so in some ways, it's kind of funny that you would think like
So
I feel like I get like more attention, but I actually think it's the opposite. That's my only real thing that I think is different. And I mean, like I guess out of the classroom, it's slightly easier to approach him, but I wouldn't say that I'm not like having weekly meetings with Mr. Walker or something about the class. Besides that, the perspective's not all too different, I wouldn't think.
Okay. That's cool.
Recording is on.
We got it. Woohoo! Sam, thanks.
Hello.
Just doing a little problem solving, and we need to mute somebody's mic. Sam, can we get you to mute your mic for just a second?
Yes.
All right, great.
See what's happening.
now?
There we go. There's Sam. That's me.
All right, let's see. Then how's he gonna be able to talk? He just has to.
When we ask the questions, it's muted. Then when he talks, he unmutes.
Okay. So Sam, welcome to class. Once we unmute you, we will be quiet and let you talk, and then when we have questions, I'll recognize kids and get them to do their thing. I think sorry about the difficulty of logging into Blue Jeans. These guys are more used to that because they have to do it twice a week. So this is my class that you can see. We've got students from Florida all the way to Texas and as far north as, what's our furthest north? We've got North Carolina, we've got Tennessee, Connecticut, Syracuse, New York. So, and we're in Washington, D.C., and I believe, and Switzerland. Sorry, we have someone from Switzerland as well. So, this is our class. These are all students that have been with us in this particular class since the beginning of January. We're all reading your book together, discussing it. They really like it a lot and are enthusiastic about having you here. So, I think maybe as a start, if you could just kind of introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us, what got you into what you do and what excites you, and then anything you want to say they'd be interested to hear, and then they certainly have questions for you as well.
Okay, so you can all hear me now? It's okay? All right, good. So thanks for joining me. My name, as you know, is Sam Keene. And I grew up in South Dakota, in Sioux Falls there. And when I was growing up, I thought I was going to be a scientist. I took all the math classes I could, all the science classes I could. I was just focused completely on being a scientist. And even when I got into college, the University of Minnesota, I was still really focused on science, just science, science, science. That's all I'd really thought about being. It was the only job I'd ever really considered. And I started off as a physics major there, but I got about 3 years or so into my physics degree, and I just realized that temperamentally I wasn't quite cut out to be a scientist. I was still enjoying my classes, still doing well in them, but the labs were sort of killing me a little bit. I wasn't getting the right answers like I should have been. Things were often breaking sort of mysteriously when I was around. And even more than that, I started working in some actual research labs for scientists, professors doing real research. And that sort of stopped me. It wasn't quite what I thought it was going to be. I guess it sounds kind of obvious in retrospect, but when you're working in a real research lab doing experiments, you don't always know how the experiment's supposed to turn out. I mean, when you're working in labs, in classes, things like that, you generally know what kind of answer you're supposed to get. It's pretty obvious when the experiment goes wrong. But in a real research lab like that, you don't know how the experiment's going to turn out. That's part of the reason you're doing the experiment. And some people really liked that. They found kind of the whole mystery of it very intriguing. I found the whole thing very frustrating because a lot of times you get a strange result or something, and maybe you've made an amazing discovery, or maybe you just screwed something up. And I didn't like that in the way that other people did. And so for the first time in my life, I started thinking, well, maybe I'm not supposed to be a scientist. Maybe I'm not cut out to do this. And I tried a chemistry lab, I tried a physics lab, I tried a biology lab, and didn't really like either of them. And again, for the first time, just sort of thought, maybe I'm not going to be a scientist. And it was a little hard for me because, as I said, I'd been so focused on being a scientist that when I suddenly wasn't going to be a scientist, it was like I almost didn't quite know who I was anymore. It sounds very dramatic, but it was like sort of the bottom fell out of me. I didn't know who I was. And so I had to figure out what I was going to do with myself after that. So I started taking some English classes, English literature classes, kind of went completely the opposite direction, and ended up getting an English major on top of my physics major. And I liked that. I'd always enjoyed reading, always enjoyed writing, so I found the English major fulfilling. But again, it wasn't quite the right fit for me. And I realized that in the end, I just sort of missed the science. And so I kind of went back and decided I was going to be a science writer. It was a very good way to marry the two interests that I had. I could keep up with science, keep learning about it, but I didn't have to be in the lab. I didn't have to specialize. I could talk about a lot of different scientific topics, basically whatever I wanted. And so I started working for my campus newspaper, which was a great fit, or a great opportunity, I should say, because I found out that as someone with the science background, I got an opportunity to write a lot of stories that I wouldn't have gotten an opportunity to write otherwise. Basically, any story with any sort of science, the editors at the newspaper just turned around and handed it right to me because they were a little worried, they were a little scared. It had some science involved. They didn't like it. They just gave it right to me. So I got an opportunity to write a lot of stories that I probably didn't have enough experience to write just because I had that science background. So then after college, I started working at some newspapers, magazines, things like that. And again, really enjoyed that, but ultimately found out that that too wasn't quite the best fit for me. Because even though I was writing about science, which I liked, magazines and newspapers, again, it seems sort of obvious in retrospect, but they're very focused on what's new, what's brand new, something that just happened last week or even yesterday. And I liked that in part, but I realized that what really excited me about the science wasn't just the discoveries. It was talking about the people involved, talking a little bit about the history. I wanted to write a little broader stories, and eventually realized that books were probably a better fit for me. So that's when I started writing my first book, which is The Disappearing Spoon, which is the book you're reading right now. And what I really liked about that book was the chance to get into a lot of different areas beyond just the science. There's chapters in the book about, politics and war and poison and all these different things that you don't usually connect with the periodic table, but that are on there if you know where to look. And that was really rewarding to kind of show people that there was a lot more to the table than just the science involved. And I've tried to do that with my other two books as well. My second book was called The Violinist's Thumb. It was about genetics, DNA, human genes, things like that. But again, I didn't want the book to be limited to just genetics. I wanted to show there was a lot more to genetics. There's stories in there about DNA in art, DNA in music, all these different areas of life, again, tied into this central idea of DNA. And then with my third book, The Dueling Neurosurgeons, that came out almost exactly a year ago now. And with that book, it's focused on the brain, obviously, but the brain gives you a lot of opportunities to go into things like emotion, memory, language, kind of these big human questions. And it was a topic I didn't know a whole lot about, neuroscience, before I got started, but really ended up being a rich, rewarding field and was as fun to write as the first two books. So that's a little bit about me, about my books, things like that. But I think most of the time I just wanted to kind of turn it over to you and answer any questions that you might have had.
All right, that's awesome. Thank you. So we had one student that had to go off to a tennis match, and I've actually got, I'm missing 3 other students that had college visits or different things that came up, so they're very disappointed. Some of them have written down questions for me, so I'll give the questions to our kids that are here live, but if I do, I might read some kid's question that wanted to be here and can't be here. And because of the nature of our class, it's actually recorded, so they'll be able to look at it later, so I'll have some kids watching this class and being able to see you even though they aren't here now. So thank you, Sam. Okay, guys, you get a chance to ask Sam, Mr. Keene some questions, and I'll take Margaret. Go ahead.
All right. Thanks for coming, Mr. Keene. I appreciate the effort in coming to see us. So you mentioned that you've written 3 books and that the Dueling Neurosurgeons came out in 2014. So I was wondering if you have any other sort of projects brewing or sort of on the back burner right now, if you're working on another book right now, and what the topic might be.
Yeah, I do have another book coming out, actually. And it's not on the back burner. It's on the front burner right now. We're working on it. We don't have a publication date yet set up for it, but the basic idea of the book is going to be about breath, about air. And the premise of it is, imagine taking a deep breath, like just inhaling as much as you possibly can. You're going to inhale a bunch of different gases when you do that. Obviously, nitrogen and oxygen are the big ones, but you're also going to inhale like volcano exhaust, little bits of anesthesia, pollution, refrigerants. All these different kind of gases are mixed in whenever you take a breath. And if you look at all the different gases that you breathe in each time, each one of them comes from a very distinct period in Earth's history. Some of them have been around even before the Earth exists. Some of them come from the very early days of Earth. Some of them come only when you start to see life forms on Earth. Some of them only come in the past 100 years when people started making new things, polluting, things like that. So basically, each chapter in the book picks out one of these gases and then just tells its story, tells about where it came from, the discovery of it, different things like that. And again, some of them are kind of these big, weighty stories about human beings evolving and where the earth comes from, things like that. But there's some sort of fun stories too. There's one about Roswell, New Mexico, and the alien invasion that supposedly happened there. Or there's another one about the time Albert Einstein tried to build this fancy new refrigerator and it ended up kind of failing. And it's sort of funny to see Albert Einstein fail at something. So all these different stories about different gases that we breathe and what they can tell you about the history of the world. We're still working on the title right now, so I'm not sure what it's going to be yet, but that's what I'm working on.
Chandler.
Hello, Mr. Keen. I saw a large number of different stories in your book, The Disappearing Spoon. I was wondering, how did you complete the research for it? What means did you go about that?
So a few of the stories I actually knew about ahead of time from professors, teachers that I just had in class, and the stories they told just stuck with me. But that was, maybe 5 or 6 of the elements. For the other 110 or so, I did have to just sit down and start thinking about what I wanted to write about. And it was just a matter of going to the library, looking up different elements and trying to figure out what I could say that was interesting about them. And at some point, I sat down with kind of this Excel spreadsheet. And by that point, I knew there were different themes emerging. Like I knew there was a few elements with stories about poison or art, or there was one chapter about bubbles, for instance. And so I just went through and I started coloring them in different colors and said, okay, I have like 5 elements in this chapter. That's probably good, but I only have 2 for this theme. Maybe I need to move them around a little bit or see if there's some sort of connection between this theme and these elements. So it was a matter of finding out what was interesting about them, but also trying to balance them a little bit. So one chapter wasn't way too long and one chapter way too short. But mostly it was just going to the library and just hunting down whatever stories I could. And that, some people don't like that research part, but I found that just as rewarding as the writing of it. So you have to have kind of a high tolerance for tedium, I think, if you want to be researching and writing a book like this. But even if the stuff didn't make it into the book, I still enjoyed doing it. It was still fun for me.
All right, lots of hands up. Let's go to Joel first, I guess.
All right. This is kind of like on the organization about the book. You kind of talked about like how you got different elements into chapters. Was it hard to come up with a way to tie like the different stories of like each element together? Like I guess some chapters like the poison was kind of easier because they were all related in some ways. But some of the other chapters, the elements didn't seem too related, but the stories still seemed to have a good flow to them. So was it hard to do that?
It was a bit of a challenge because, there wasn't an obvious way to tie them all together. But I did work hard to make sure that it wasn't going to be too choppy. When I originally wrote the book, I had written 118 individual, like very tiny short chapters. And I think the problem with that is it did get too choppy. It didn't have that flow. So having the themes, I think, kind of a central theme for each chapter did help that out. And there was a lot of rearranging where I might, think, oh, this would be a great element story to start the chapter. But then as I was reading it, I realized, maybe it actually fits a little better here. So it was a matter of doing a lot of rearranging even within the chapter just to make sure it flowed, because I did realize there was a danger of it getting too choppy like that. So it's good to hear it wasn't choppy. It did flow somewhat.
Let's see, Maya.
Just with all the research that went into Disappearing Spoon with footnotes and everything else, how long did it take you to write that?
So it took about 2 years to write the book. That was cheating a little bit because, like I said, I knew some of the stories ahead of time, and I had a good background in the science because of my degree and because I took chemistry classes. So I didn't have to learn a lot of the science. So that helped out definitely. But yeah, it was still, just a lot of work trying to fit it in. I think the one reason why it probably moved a little quicker was that, each chapter isn't completely independent, but each chapter could kind of stand on its own. If you just read it by itself, it would kind of make sense. So I could be researching one chapter while I was writing the next chapter. So I could kind of move in parallel doing that. And I think that saved me some time. Whereas if I was writing like a biography of someone, in that case, you'd probably have to do almost all the research ahead of time before you even really got started writing. So I could kind of move in parallel like that.
Chad, and then we'll go to Samvit.
Mr. Keen, is there a chemistry or element story that isn't in the book that you wish you would have put in the book?
There were a few stories I heard about elements involved with art. So I think I mentioned a little bit in there about elements being involved with pigments and with famous artists, things like that. But there's more out there about that I wish I had gotten into. There were also stories I keep hearing about mercury, which is my favorite element, definitely. And people just, when you start talking about mercury, people have all these stories. So I've heard other stories about mercury that might have been fun to put in there, but just didn't have room for. I can say with my second book, with The Violinist's Thumb, there was a story or two in there that I didn't hear about until after the book came out that I wish I had heard about. That would have been fun to put in, interesting stories to put in. But I just didn't know about them ahead of time. So,
Samvit?
Mr. Keen, in developing the book, aside from going to the library, did you interview any other scientists in the field or travel to any other places to develop your stories?
With this book, I didn't do very much for interviewing or traveling. I guess with all of my books, I haven't done as much interviewing and traveling. I write magazine and newspaper stories still, and that's much more heavily interview-based, traveling, going to see things. But with the books, I haven't done as much, in part because they were a little involved with history. So a lot of times the scientists were long dead and, there's no one around to interview. And there were, in most cases, I think, enough good sources out there, either the original scientific papers or papers about the history involved, where I could get the details I wanted without having to travel a lot, interview, things like that. The books did come out kind of quickly, as I said. If I'd had a little bit more time, I might have made some of those trips, done things like that. But mostly it was looking at papers, just kind of gleaning the details from
there. Casey?
Is the editing process for a scientific book like this different than it would be for a fiction or fantasy book? Do you know?
Yeah, I can say that the editing definitely would be different because... Sorry, I made a weird noise there. The editing would definitely be different because when you're writing a nonfiction book, the plot, so to speak, is sort of laid out for you ahead of time. You don't have to worry about the facts changing because the facts already happened. It's just you're writing down what did happen. You want to make it fun. You want to make it interesting. You want to make it as much as possible like a fiction book to make it entertaining for people. But some parts of it are already fixed for you. Whereas when you're writing like a fiction book, one thing that fiction writers talk about a lot is you sort of discover new things along the way. So you're writing something, you're toward the end, and you think, what if my character did this? And then it sort of sends off all these associations in your head, like, wow, well, that would be great, that would be fantastic. But then you have to kind of go back and say, well, I need to set that up a little bit, or maybe it's contradicting something that had before. You would have to go back to the beginning and change things along the way. Whereas you wouldn't have to do that so much with a nonfiction book. So that process, I think, definitely would be different. I can also say another difference between fiction and nonfiction when it comes to selling the book, when you're actually talking to agents, talking to editors. One difference is that with nonfiction books, you usually just have to have one chapter of the book written, and then you have an outline for the rest of it that says, chapter 1 is this, chapter 2 is this, etc. And then again, one good sample chapter. Whereas with a fiction book, you almost always have to have the whole book written out ahead of time, or they're probably not even going to look at it. So that's just a difference between the fiction and the nonfiction.
Robin?
So one question I had was, do you have a role model and or an inspiration, and who would this be?
There are a few writers that I look up to a lot. David Foster Wallace is one that comes to mind. He's probably my favorite writer. And just some other great books I've read that make me think like, wow, I really want to write something like that. Books like, there's one called The Guinea Pig's History of Biology. Neil Stevenson, if you know him, he's written some amazing books. Those are fiction, but they're very heavily invested in science. The Making of the Atomic Bomb, all of those books, you read them and you get, even like a little jealous while you're reading them. You think, darn, I want to write something like this. So it's exciting. It's fun to read those books, and it makes you, you look up to those books and you think, I want to write something like that someday.
Maya?
Besides writing and science, what do you like to do, really?
Well, I like reading, period. I read, outside of science, I read pretty much anything. I have a very eclectic reading habit, so I read a lot. I'm a runner. I like running a fair amount. And theater is the other thing I really enjoy. I like going to plays, and Washington, D.C. is a great place for that. That's where I live, in Washington. So I see a lot of theater around here as well. And with the writing, I've gotten to travel a lot, which has been fun. Some in foreign countries, but around the U.S. a lot too. So those are what occupy my time, those things.
Sam, I'm going to read a question from a student that's absent, Maurice. What scientist would you say is the most underappreciated? In other words, what scientist has contributed disproportionately to the scientific community relative to his or her recognition?
I think I would go with, I mentioned him in the book a few times, Ernest Rutherford is a name that kind of pops to mind. There's probably a better answer out there, but I think Ernest Rutherford pops to mind. He was someone who was very well regarded in his day, and he's still pretty well known today. So it's not like he's obscure exactly. But I don't think he gets the appreciation that he used to. He really used to be a famous, well-known scientist, and a little less so nowadays. The other one that comes to mind is there's a man named Sanger, Frederick Sanger. He was an English biologist. He actually won 2 Nobel Prizes, 2 separate Nobel Prizes, which is something that very, very few people have done. And he was basically the first person to sequence an organism's genome. So you hear about sequencing genes sequencing DNA nowadays. What they're basically doing is they're going in and they're looking at all the little tiny bits of DNA and reading them. Basically, like you'd go in and you'd read a book, go letter by letter. He was the first one to really do that. And he did another very important project too, looking at amino acids and the relationship between your genes and your amino acids. And again, he won 2 Nobel Prizes for it. So it's not like he is a complete unknown, but he's not a name that a lot of people know, even though he did this really important, really fundamental work.
Sam, I'll read one more question from a student, Olivia, who writes, if you could meet any of the scientists, past or present, who would it be and why?
Well, as I said, Ernest Rutherford has always been a kind of a hero of mine. I think it would have been fun. Who would I meet? I think I would meet Isaac Newton because not only is he obviously an amazing, amazing scientist, he was a very strange person, very odd, and probably wouldn't have been that pleasant to meet or hang out with. He was kind of mean, a little short with people, but just to see him and observe him, I think would have been sort of fascinating. So I'm not sure I would have enjoyed the hour or whatever I would have with Sir Isaac, but I think it'd be fascinating to at least meet him.
Samvit.
Mr. Keen, you have written several other books, but outside of that, have you contributed your knowledge of chemistry to other media forms, such as videos or like game projects, like video games or something?
I haven't done any chemistry video games yet. Maybe someday. I have worked in some other mediums. I have recorded some videos for American Chemical Society, ACS, that are probably on YouTube, just different videos about different things. I do give a lot of talks where, I'll go to a conference or a university or a library, museum, and give a talk about one of my books, things like that. And I've also done some radio work for places. There's a fantastic, fantastic show called Radio Lab, if any of you have ever heard of that show. It's a really amazing show. I recommend it highly. I've done some work with them and been on some other radio shows, podcasts, things like that. So yeah, I've dabbled in other things, but still mostly a writer, I would say.
Margaret, and then we'll go to Casey.
Okay, yeah, getting back to the disappearing spoon, I've done some research. I think there's actually a writing assignment in this class where we did some research on an element and put some writing together. And it was my experience in doing that there are stories out there, but there are gaps in the information. And I was wondering if in writing The Disappearing Spoon, if you encountered sort of a gap in a story where there's kind of something missing or you can't quite sort of like qualify the information from a reliable source or something, if there was any sort of like fudge factor built into the book, or there was a little bit of creative license in constructing the stories.
Yeah, you do unfortunately run into that a lot, where there's parts of the stories that that are really fascinating and you want to fill out all the other details, but you just can't. It doesn't exist, or you find something that's basically a legend or something like that. And I'm a believer that you can include things like legends or hearsay, rumors, things like that, as long as you let people know that it's maybe not the most reliable information. You can say, hey, this is a fun story, and it's maybe a little bit exaggerated, or it's maybe a legend, but even the fact that it's a legend and that people believe it can kind of say something about the person. Or if if there's a gap in certain things, maybe, you don't want to, well, I guess I should say you can have a little bit of creative license, again, as long as you let people know that you're doing that. You can say, okay, we don't know exactly what they ate for dinner that night, but based on what similar people would have eaten, this is what they might have had, or something like that. So that way you're giving readers those fun details and kind of bringing it alive for them. But you're also making it clear that you don't know exactly. You're just kind of giving them something plausible. And I think as long as you're clear that it is a little bit of license and it is plausible that you have done your research, then I think it's okay. It gives it a little bit more life, and you're not misleading them. So as long as you're doing those things, I think it's okay.
I think we're going to go to Casey, and then we can go back over to Joel.
I was wondering if you had one chapter that was just significantly more fun to write than the other chapters. And you've also written a couple more books now, so I was wondering if you have one book that's a personal favorite for you.
With Disappearing Spoon, the chapter that I keep coming back to and thinking about is the chapter about the Soviet scientists and the American scientists, and that big, long, nasty fight they got in about the right to name the elements. Just because it was something I'd not heard of before. I didn't know much about it, so I felt like I was kind of discovering this new story. And the whole thing was just so ridiculous to me that it was such a nasty fight, and it lasted so long that I just found the whole story delightful, top to bottom. So that's the one story that stands out. And I also like the Bubbles chapter, I think, because I certainly hadn't set out to write a chapter about bubbles. They just kept coming up over and over. And I thought, you know what? This is my book. I'm going to write a chapter about bubbles because I want to write a chapter about bubbles. So it was fun to be able to do that, to just have a chapter about something kind of random like that. As far as books overall, you get asked that question, which book is your favorite? And sort of the classic rejoinder is, like, which child is your favorite? Like, you can't pick one of them. It's really, really hard to say that I like this book better than this book because you poured so much into each one of them. I can say that the books are a little different in style in that with The Disappearing Spoon, the stories are usually a little shorter and the jumps are usually a little quicker just because I had so much to fit in there about all 118 elements. Whereas with the second and third book, I had a little bit more room, a little bit more space to kind of develop each chapter because there were fewer chapters within the book. So they're written in a little different style. And it's fun to write in the different style depending on the story and what it deserves. So I guess that doesn't exactly answer your question. I weaseled out of it a little bit, but that's my answer.
Joel, I think.
Yeah. So you talked about how you started liking science because of mercury and you got to play with broken thermometers, the mercury out of it. I'm a little bit bitter because I've never actually gotten to seen mercury. Don't you think that in high schools we should be able to play with it in a controlled environment at least? Because I've never even seen it and it has such cool physical properties and I've talked about it a lot, but I feel like I'd want to actually play with it.
Well, assuming there's no legal liability on me here, then yes, I think definitely you should be able to play with mercury. It's a really fascinating element, and it is unfortunate that you just don't have the opportunity to experience that, to really have that kind of it's just like an awakening. Wow, this is such an amazing substance. And I kind of understand the reasons for it, but everyone who's ever had a chance to play with mercury remembers it very, very well. It's just such an incredible substance. And so I wish there was some sort of opportunity to at least get the chance to use it in some way. Maybe you could have lead-lined clubs in a box or something, but just to at least see it in some capacity. So I would be behind this. I would support this.
Very good, very good. Maya, Let me interrupt. Sam, I'm going to email you a funny story about me and mercury, just because I don't want to take airtime here. I want the kids to be able to have it. But I've had my share of experiences with it as a classroom teacher, and I have a funny story, like an intellectual field trip I like to take to a big pool of mercury. So I'll send that as an email, and I'll actually copy the kids. If you're okay with them having your email address, I just want to ask that question.
Yeah, no, fine.
All right, cool. So I'll send that, copy them. Maya, you've got the floor.
So all your books jump from different areas of science. So what's another kind of, I guess, more abstract area that you are kind of interested in learning about?
Yeah, I have jumped around a little bit. The first book, I was drawing on my knowledge as a physics major, and I had to take a lot of chemistry classes. With the genetics book, I was writing a lot about genetics at the time for different publications. I was drawing on that. The neuroscience book, actually, I didn't know anything about neuroscience before I started writing the book, which seems a little foolhardy to jump into and start writing a book about that. But it's a good way to have to learn, and it was definitely worth it to get the chance to learn about it like that. About another area I'm interested in, I don't know. There are a lot of areas. As I said, I'm a physics major. I was a physics major, and I never have quite found the right hook for physics yet. Physics is, like, in some ways, the most abstract of the sciences, or you can get the most abstract. I've never quite found something where I could have a physics topic at the core and then kind of jump into these other areas like I like to do. Another topic I've always been interested in is disasters and catastrophes and things like that. So maybe someday I'd want to write a book about catastrophes, but haven't quite got the idea fully formed, I guess, yet. So, but those are some things I've been, kind of percolating and been thinking about.
So Robin, and then we'll go to.
So one question I had also for you is, well, you mentioned that your favorite element is mercury, and do you have a favorite molecule, perhaps?
A favorite molecule? I think I would have to go with DNA, just because I wrote that book about DNA, and it has some really fascinating properties in that it's not a regular molecule like you're used to seeing. If you look at H2O or CO2 or NH3, whatever, all of those are pretty much exactly the same. There might be a little difference in there, but they're pretty much exactly the same. Whereas DNA, it's fairly regular, but it doesn't repeat itself, and that gives it a lot of power, makes it a very interesting molecule. And that's where its power comes from, is the fact that it doesn't repeat like that. So I would go with DNA, and I've always found the idea of heavy water kind of cool too. That's water with a normal oxygen, a normal O, but instead of hydrogen 1 with just one proton, it has hydrogen with a proton and a neutron, so deuterium, basically. So it's called heavy water because it weighs a little bit more than regular water. And I just found the whole idea very cool, that it's water mostly, but it's different, and it behaves differently in the body. So this basic substance, even water, has kind of this mysterious alter ego. I always kind of like that
idea. Chandler?
You mentioned that the chemistry classes you took in college gave some background to the disappearing spoon, but was there like a sort of inspiration behind writing that led you to write about the entire periodic table?
There were a couple things. Probably the biggest, though, was that in my chemistry classes, there were just huge swaths of the periodic table that we never talked about, that never came up in class. I didn't know anything about these elements, and it was just like dozens and dozens of elements that I didn't know anything about them. And I'd never, maybe heard a story about one or two of them here or there, but for the most part, they were just mysteries to me. And I thought it would be fun to try to capture every single one on there. It was kind of a challenge, too, to see if I could do it. So there was part of me that I knew there would be good stories out there based on the elements that I did know. But I just suspected there would be also, it'd be kind of fun to solve the mystery and show people what all these other elements are doing, what they're like. So that was part of the motivation, was to make, just kind of give a little attention to these more obscure elements.
Casey?
Kind of going off of that, why did you choose to write the book using anecdotes instead of taking a scientific and like textbook approach to the periodic table?
The biggest reason why was I didn't think anyone would really care to read a more scientific, or I guess more textbook approach. And you can get that in other places. You can go to a textbook. There are lots of textbooks out there that cover a lot of different elements, and you can get that information out. But that's not what I wanted to do, and I wanted to aim at a little different reader in that I was looking for people who knew a little bit about chemistry, or maybe, they'd probably almost all of them taken a chemistry class at one point in high school or whatever. But maybe that was 20 years ago and they'd forgotten everything, and they didn't want to go through the work of like digging out a textbook and learning all of it. They just wanted to have some fun. And I didn't think there's anything wrong with having some fun. I mean, textbooks are important. They give you the information. You need that information to do the science. It's indispensable for it. But there's a role, I think, to have a little bit of fun, too, when you're someone who's not a scientist, not going to be doing science, but you want to know a little bit more about it. And that's what I was trying to do with not just this book, but with each of my books. So you didn't have to read a technical paper to learn a little bit about DNA, or to read a textbook to learn a little bit about how the brain works. You could learn about it in a fun way. And the anecdote way is important because it captures people's attention. And we're good at remembering stories. We're good at remembering anecdotes in a way that we're not good with remembering facts and data, unconnected, stuff like that. We're just our minds work in a story form. So when you tell people stories, they remember it.
Let me read one more from a student that's not here, Maurice, and then Samvith will go to you. Maurice asked, Sam, what do you think is the next frontier in science?
I think we're going to start to see, well, a couple things I'm hopeful for. One, I'm really hopeful about astrobiology, which is basically the idea of looking for life on other planets. You might have heard that we're getting very good at finding planets around distant stars. And that's not something that, within my lifetime, I can remember back when we knew about no other planets beyond the ones in our solar system, out to, like Neptune, about there. Whereas now we know of thousands of other planets. We don't know if any of them have life yet because our telescopes aren't quite good enough to get there yet. But we're developing new telescopes, new tools, new ways to look at light and analyze data, where we might be able to tease some of that information out. So I think that's going to be a really, really fascinating, interesting area of science. And yeah, I'm very hopeful we're going to get some interesting results, some cool results from that.
Samvith?
As a kind of like fun question, Mr. Keen, if you were to summarize the disappearing spoon in 6 words, what would those words be?
6 words, okay.
Yeah, this is in reference to a TED Talk on how the guy was able to summarize all the talks in 6 words.
Okay. Funny, spooky, strange, element stories. That's 5 words. I did better. So,
Excellent.
something like that.
Excellent.
Olivia has a question as well. Sam, if you could meet any of these scientists of the past or present, sorry, you've answered that question. She had a different one. Why did the story of gallium and the disappearing spoon resonate with you so much that you decided to name the book Disappearing Spoon?
Well, the short answer was I didn't name the book. So that was my publisher actually came up with that. But I was happy with it. I liked that title. And it ended up being a good title for the book for a few reasons. One, it's sort of mysterious. You don't know what this spoon is, but it's disappearing. It just sounds kind of intriguing. And the other reason was that it's a fun title. And once you read the story of gallium and you know about it, it kind of captures the spirit of the book in that you learn some good science. There's some cool, interesting science about gallium, and it explains why that practical joke works. So you learn some science, but it's kind of lighthearted. It's fun science too. So I think it, again, captures kind of the spirit of the book.
Sam, what would you say are the characteristics of a good scientist? You've done so much research and seen so many scientists in action and where they are in history. What would you say are some of the characteristics that make a good scientist?
A few things. One is a willingness to follow your curiosity wherever it leads. I think that's probably been the biggest thing that drives most scientists is they don't get stuck on, I'm going to do this work because it's going to, I'm supposed to be doing this. A lot of great discoveries were accidents or something where people think something went slightly wrong or something didn't quite look right. And it's easy to kind of dismiss those or not think about them. But people pursued them. They got curious, they got interested, and they kind of poured themselves into it. Another characteristic, and I guess it maybe sounds like it contradicts the first one a little bit, but another characteristic is keeping big ideas in mind and trying to at least make headway into those ideas. Because one thing that modern science does is it gets very focused on, or it forces you to focus very narrowly on one topic. And people find that very rewarding. They love knowing everything about this specific type of A or B or whatever. But if you can pull back and kind of ask yourself why that helps us answer a bigger question, not just about this one fungus or this one type of star. What does that help us understand about the universe in general? If you can ask those types of questions, sometimes you're going to realize that your work, even though it's very narrow, can kind of shed light on those bigger questions. So those are two things that I think a lot of great scientists share.
I'm looking at our clock, seeing we have about 2 minutes. So either, do you have any summary type words you want to say to these kids, or Robin can ask his question. So I'll let you direct how you want to finish.
Robin can ask. That's fine.
Just one. Last question. Do you have a favorite experiment?
Sam, you're muted.
I think my favorite experiment is the one that Ernest Rutherford did, where he was trying to figure out, or he didn't know what he was trying to figure out exactly. He just had an intuition. He was trying to maybe see what the atom was like. And so what he did is he had a very thin sheet of gold foil, and he started shooting particles at it and seeing what happened to these particles. And a lot of them ended up flying right through this thin sheet because, as we now know, that an atom is mostly empty space. There's hardly anything there. But every once in a while, one of these particles would fly at this gold sheet, and it would bounce back. It would bounce straight back. And no one had expected this. No one had any idea what it meant. And Rutherford had kind of this famous quote where he said, it was like you fired a 15-inch shell, like a big, bazooka or cannon shell, at a piece of paper and it bounced right back at you. That is how unexpected this was. And it goes to show Rutherford was very famous for doing very simple but very elegant and very decisive experiments. And experiments can get very, very complicated nowadays. So it's kind of refreshing to see someone who's able to get so much out of such simple experiments. It's very, very inspiring, I think.
Neat. Sam, thanks so much for sharing time with us. And I think our kids would just like to thank you.
No, no problem. I appreciate it. Thank you.
It's been so much fun reading your book, talking about it, and then meeting you, and having to answer questions. So thanks again.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. Bye, everyone.
See you Monday. Bye, Sam. Bye, Maya. Bye, Samvit. Bye, Casey, guys. Maurice, take care.
Have a good day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walker.
Bye-bye, Robin. See you, Samvit.
Mr. Walker.
Bye-bye. Good job in class, everybody.